Ladies and gentlemen, this is Nikhil Parekh from Ahmedabad city in India. In this video, I shall be giving you a recitation of my poem that is titled Stitched. So, without wasting a further instant, I shall now commence upon the recitation of my poem that is titled Stitched. This poem of mine is in my book titled Love vs. Terrorism, Part 1, that has differently titled poems on anti-terror, peace, love, brotherhood. In order to stitch parent patches of colossal sky, all that was required was a conglomerate of voluptuously silken clouds. In order to stitch the miserably dilapidated walls of the castle, all that was required was a flurry of handsome bricks and fortified cement. In order to stitch the overwhelmingly bloodshot eye, in order to stitch the overwhelmingly bloodshot eye, all that was required was river of poignantly emphatic tears. In order to stitch the ragged sheet of wretchedly torn paper, all that was required was parsimonious droplets of efficacious glue. In order to stitch brutally bruised and pathetic wounds, all that was required was minuscule traces of potently healing antiseptic. In order to stitch a battalion of smashed teeth, in order to stitch a battalion of smashed teeth, all that was required was astronomical fillings of invincibly tenacious calcium. In order to stitch the hungrily parched desert, crying hoarsely under the sweltering sun, crying hoarsely under the sweltering sun, all that was required was an ocean of deliciously sweet and sparkling water. In order to stitch the hungrily parched desert, crying hoarsely under the sweltering sun, all that was required was an ocean of deliciously sweet and sparkling water. In order to stitch a dolorous pair of profusely gloomy lips, all that was required was tinkling laughter and intriguingly enchanting smile. In order to stitch the pigeon lying gruesomely injured and helplessly slithering on the ground, all that was required was a pinch of fresh mud, which almost intransigently fomented it to soar robustly and fly. In order to stitch profoundly distorted chunks of ice, all that was required was a refrigerator, with its power to chill, escalating exuberantly towards blue sky. In order to stitch the disastrously disheveled web, all that was required was a silvery spider which traversed to and fro, faster than the speed of dazzling light. Faster than the speed of dazzling light. In order to stitch the haywire and incoherently absurd story, in order to stitch the haywire and incoherently absurd story, all that was required was a thoroughly imaginative and ardent writer. In order to stitch insurmountably morbid anecdotes of painstaking gloom, in order to stitch insurmountably morbid anecdotes of painstaking gloom, all that was required was an uninhibitedly hilarious joke. In order to stitch the abhorrently looking gaped holed shoe, In order to stitch the abhorrently looking gaping holed shoe, all that was required was miraculous pairs of glossily dangling lace. All that was required was meticulous pairs of glossily dangling lace. In order to stitch a hastily abraded battlefield of lies, all that was required was the omnipotent essence of irrefutable truth. In order to stitch a hastily abraded battlefield of lies, all that was required was the omnipotent essence of irrefutable truth. In order to stitch unfathomable kilometers of space deluged with profoundly treacherous darkness, all that was required was stringent beams of optimistic light. In order to stitch dead shades of rapidly diminishing life, all that was required was inconspicuous mouthfuls of celestially blissful breath. In order to stitch dead shades of rapidly diminishing life, all that was required was inconspicuous mouthfuls of celestially blissful breath. In order to stitch the satanically shattered self-esteem, in order to stitch the satanically shattered self-esteem, all that was required was candidly listening to the voice of the innermost conscience. And in order to stitch the shamefully dispersed land of violence and obnoxious hatred, all that was required was a stream of immortal love, a stream that caused crime to perpetually fall. And in order to stitch the shamefully dispersed land of violence and obnoxious hatred, all that was required was a stream of immortal love, a stream that caused crime to perpetually fall. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for listening to me. From the enormous dormitory of my soul, I wanted to thank you for your victoriously glorious patronization to my poetry.